In today's video, I'm going to be showing you exactly how I like to use corrections within my obedience training. And when I say corrections, I mean the use of positive punishment. I'm going to show you how to do a proper leash pop, and I'm going to show you how to use a remote training collar. My go-to remote training collar is e-collar technology. They're excellent. I'm going to make sure I put a link in the description, so if you want to pick one up, you can. If you want off-leash obedience for your dog, this is really the only true way to do it. If you have some reservations on it, check out the video. Maybe I can change your mind and get you to see the world in which is unlocked when we teach our dogs how to be fully trained off leash using this incredible tool. So stay tuned, because we're going to go through the entire process. If you want 100% reliability within your training, or if you want to have that off-leash freedom with your dog, you have to understand how to use corrections. So I'm going to explain the process that I like to use when it comes to adding corrections. We want to think about the main problems that we have when it comes to working with our dogs. We have obedience issues and we have behavioral issues. Obedience issues, we have two subcategories. We have a dog not doing something we want them to do, and we have a dog not staying in a stay. That's going to be our main obedience issues. And then for behavioral issues, we have dangerous behaviors, destructive behaviors, behaviors based on fear, behaviors based on aggression, and behaviors we just don't want our dogs to do, like breaking the climb. All right, climb. So those are the main things that we have to think about. Now, if we know how to approach these, it makes the whole process much easier. Of course, there could be something that your dog is doing that falls under multiple categories. A good example could be loose leash walking. You're walking with your dog breaks the position to start barking at another dog. So now that could be defined as a behavioral issue as well as an obedience issue. If we know what it is, we can approach it though. So the ones that we're not going to cover in this course is fear-based behaviors or behaviors based on aggression. If you are dealing with fear-based behaviors or behaviors based on aggression, the approach that I like to take is counterconditioning combined with desensitization. There's other approaches like behavioral adjustment training, flooding, habituation. These things are usually directed towards that. But we're not going to get into that because that'll take another 3 hours. But what we are going to talk about is dangerous, destructive behaviors we don't want our dogs to perform, and obedience. So dangerous and destructive behaviors. If you had a list of behaviors that you can tell your dog, this is dangerous, this is destructive, don't do it. If they are doing those behaviors and that's not being triggered by fear or aggression, then we can correct it. I correct it right away, meaning I add positive punishment to the situation right away to remove the behavior. A few examples: chasing cars, digging, getting into the trash, drinking out of the toilet bowl, chewing on furniture. These are all dangerous or destructive behaviors. The easiest way to deal with those is with a remote collar. You have a remote training collar. So let me show you the one I like to use. A lot of trainers use this. This is e-collar technology. I really like them. They are my go-to when it comes to using a remote training collar. So let's say I'm working with my dog and my dog has a tendency to dig. So I go, okay, I send my dog in the yard and I watch my dog from inside the house. And this is the first thing that I will actually correct the first thing I will correct using a remote collar when it comes to working with my dog. And that's dangerous or destructive behaviors. It's the very first thing. So I have my dog in the yard, my dog starts to dig, boom, I press the button at the exact moment my dog is digging. My dog goes, whoa, what was that? And then we get to be the good guy. We go, what happened? Did that dirt bite you? And our dog stops digging. And they don't associate us to the correction, they associate the act of digging. And that's why it's the first thing that I correct, because I don't want the dog to think that I'm involved with that situation. I want them to think that it's just something that happens when they dig, and then they never dig again. But if we teach a dog how to be directional, meaning they understand the corrections coming from us. So like with my dog Ari, she's in a stay right now. She has the remote collar on. If I correct her, she knows it's me. I've taught her that the correction is coming from me. And I do that after I fix my behavioral issues. And we have to make sure if the dog is performing one of these behavioral issues that we don't like, that it's not being triggered by fear. If a dog is doing something based on fear, let's say your dog is trying to dig to get away from something it's afraid of, and we correct it, we only make the fear worse. So we never use positive punishment to correct a fear-based behavior, as it'll only make the fear-based behavior worse, because we're solidifying the fact that the dog should be afraid. So dog digs, I press the button. The dog gets into the trash can. I'll put some food right at the top. I'll close the lid, maybe a little piece of meat sticking out to entice the dog. Dog goes over, tries to take it. I press the button. I go, what happened? And if my dog works to like this remote collar that I'm using, it goes to 0 to 100. So we can really pinpoint fine details within our training, the level of the correction that we need to make for that dog. Some dogs might need a level 40, some might need a level 60, some might need a level 10. It's gonna change depending on the dog. So if I have the dog go to get into the trash can, if the dog, well, usually I start at the lower end because that's what I'm correcting first. So I'll usually correct between a 20 and a 40 because most dogs that I train will train between a 15 and a 25 for obedience. So usually I'll go a little higher than that to stop a behavioral issue. But I don't want to go right up to the max level because that could be what's known as an avoidance level correction. An avoidance level correction is where the correction's so high, the dog avoids they might even avoid the location. So if you think about if somebody has one of those invisible fences for their dog and they don't do the proper training and the dog gets a high level correction, the dog may not even want to go into the yard because they're like, oh, there's landmines out there. I don't know where I can go and where I can't go, so I'm just gonna avoid the yard. So we keep it at a lower level, but slightly higher than we think that they're gonna need for obedience. We correct them the exact moment they do it. So that's dangerous and destructive. But let's say you don't have a remote collar. You can use a leash and a collar. Now, for dogs that have lower correction levels, I like to compare this to your bank account. So everyone has their bank account. Dogs have a bank account as well. The dog's bank account, they're either very wealthy or very poor. If I have a dog that's very poor, the correction level is going to be very low. If I have a very rich dog, the correction level is going to have to be higher. And what's interesting is golden retrievers that I've trained, they often tend to be what we like to call the Elon Musks of the dog world. They need higher correct, because they're so happy-go-lucky, you correct them, they're like, what was that? Right, so we have to adjust the correction to the dog that we're working with, but we do escalation of force. So we start at a lower level and we gradually increase. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna practice our leash pops on something like this, like a fence or a chair, or if you have a partner that can put it on their wrist, because you want to practice the motion that you're going to be using when you're correcting your dog. If I have a sensitive dog, I'm going to correct with something like this, a martingale collar. The reason why I like this is if I pull on it, it will tighten, but it won't continue to tighten like a choke chain would. There's a stopping point, so it's not going to choke our dog, but this chain is going to give a little bit more of a snap when we give the dog the correction. If the dog needs a higher level correction, let's say you're using this, you're correcting your dog, but they continue to do the behavior, then that just means you need to up the level of the correction. You might have to go to something like a prong collar. But if I'm using a prong collar or a pinch collar, the process is going to be the same. So these are the ways that I like to practice my leash pops. So if I have the dog in front of me, when we're popping the leash, it's not a grab and pull. We're not cracking a whip. This isn't gonna be it, so it's not a whip crack. The starting position and the stopping position is almost the same spot. So this is the way that I'm gonna correct most dogs. So I wanna practice this way, I wanna practice this way, and I wanna practice with the opposite hand, doing the correction. Another thing is I like to correct upward if I'm correcting a dog for breaking a sit. So this is how I practice that. I pull down and I snap. So there's a little snap to it. So you want to practice this to where it feels pretty natural. Once you can do that and it feels really comfortable, then you want to add the marker. Just like everything else, the marker must precede the physical cue. I like to use the word no. So if I was using a remote collar, I would say no, then I press the button. For this, it's no, then pop. No, then pop. In fact, a lot of people find it to be much easier to do this if they say pop when they pop the leash. So if that helps you, give it a shot. Say no, pop, no, pop, no, pop, no, pop, no, pop. That's gonna help you with your timing. And that's what's going to get the dog conditioned. So then when your dog does a behavior you don't like and you're unable to correct them the exact moment that they do it, you can say no, and your dog goes, oh, okay. You don't want me to do that behavior. You've made it very clear. And you can follow it up with the correction in order to get that reliability. So this is what we want to practice. Now, if you are using a remote collar, I'm not going to get into all the features. There's a lot. If you pick up one of these e-collar technology, it has a manual. There's plenty of videos that you can find, but they have different corrections. You can lock it. You can have a tone or a vibrate. There's a light. There's all kinds of different features. Again, we're not going to get into that now. They have a manual, or you can watch plenty of videos that are already available on YouTube for free how to use this as far as the functions. Now I'm going to tell you how I use it when working with my dog. And when we start adding corrections. So dangerous and destructive behaviors, we correct those right away. We've already established that. We're not correcting fear or aggression. That'll often make it worse, and that's a very complicated issue. Behaviors we don't want a dog to perform. So that's going to be our boundaries. So jumping up on people, jumping up on furniture. This is the process that I follow when it comes to correcting that. And that's the second thing that I start to correct when I'm using a remote collar. So remember, if we're using a remote collar, the very first thing that we are going to correct is dangerous and destructive behaviors. But before we do that, we want to create a positive association to the collar. You might be asking yourself, well, how do we create a strong positive association? Very easy. We take the collar out, we put the collar on our dog, we do a fun activity, we finish that activity, we take the collar off. So then the dog learns that the collar is the precursor to the fun activity. If you've ever played a sport or anything like that, you get your gear, you get your vest. I train jiu-jitsu, so I put on my rash guard or I put on my gi. I have a very strong positive association to that because I love jiu-jitsu. If your dog loves playing fetch, loves going on walks, loves eating, whatever it is, training, you put the collar on, you do the activity, you take it off. Eventually, you're gonna pull out the collar and your dog's gonna go, oh, awesome, we're gonna be doing some training, we're gonna be playing fetch, whatever. Now we've created that strong positive association. And that could take a week or two, maybe even 3. Then we correct dangerous and destructive behaviors. Then the next thing we correct is boundaries or breaking the stay. Because we are being reactive, that's why we correct these. It's more clear to the dog. We're correcting an action that the dog just did. When we start correcting non-compliancy to a command, we're correcting an inaction. We're correcting the dog for not doing something that we want, which is harder for a dog to understand. So that's why we start with first correcting the actions. It makes it more clear in the dog's mind. So now I've been working my boundaries. When do I know to go to corrections? Easy. When the dog starts to respond to my marker that predicts a negative reinforcement. So my dog enters the kitchen. Wrong. My dog leaves the kitchen. Next time you enter the kitchen, it's not going to be a reinforcement event. I'm not going to say wrong. It's going to be a correction event. Dog jumps up on the sofa. Wrong. Dog jumps off. Next time you jump up on the sofa, it's not going to be a reinforcement event. It's going to be a correction event. Dog breaks the stay. Wrong. Dog goes back into the stay. Now, I'm saying this each time I say it, the dog goes back or they fix themselves on their own. I don't have to show them. We're on a walk, dog goes ahead of me. Wrong. Dog jumps back on their own. Once I see that for each separate behavior in each separate environment, then I transition to a correction. And I like to start with the stay because I can set it up to make it more difficult to where I can correct the dog. So now I have the dog on a stay. So let's swing over here where Ari is. Wrong. And I said wrong there just because I said her name and I use a dog's name as an informal come when called. So now I'm working the dog and I'm gonna have it on her correction level. So her correction level is 20. And this is exactly how I would do it to a brand new dog, assuming the dog has a positive association to the collar and assuming that we've already corrected dangerous and destructive behaviors. I'm gonna try to get the dog to break. The moment she breaks, I'm gonna say no, and then I'm gonna press the button on the collar. Now I have my hands behind my back, and this is what I usually do with other dogs as well, or I have my hand in my pocket because I don't want the remote to be a big visual for the dog. I don't want to take the remote and go, you better listen to me. I got that remote. We don't want to do that. And people will often brag about that. They go, oh, the moment I pull out the remote, then my dog listens. It's like, okay, now the dog's responding to the remote and not the obedience that you taught them to perform. I don't want them to see the remote as part of the visual. But your smarter dogs, they will become aware. So I'm going to try to get her to break. The moment she breaks the position, I'm going to say one no. I'm going to press the button on the collar. If she goes back on her own, I'm going to tell her, good girl. In fact, break. I'm gonna move this over so we can adjust the visual for you guys, make it more open. All right, climb. So the moment she breaks, I'm gonna say no. Now, this is also something we wanna keep in mind. Just like our dogs have a change of behavior when they're classically conditioned to a word that predicts a reward, we have a change of behavior for a dog that's classically conditioned to a word that predicts a correction. The most common that I've seen, and this is important to know, number one is what I call instant compliancy, and this is by far the most common if you're using this training system. Instant compliancy means the dog breaks the position. If we're using this as an example, we say no and the dog instantly goes back. That's instant compliancy. Number two is what I call evasion. The dog breaks the position, we say no, the dog goes, I'm out of here, you're not correcting me. Number three is what I call freeze in place. The dog breaks the position, you say no, the dog goes, oh, I messed up. And then number four, the dog runs to the human. You say no, the dog runs to you and goes, oh, I'm sorry. Those are the most common. It doesn't matter which one your dog does, they still receive the correction. This is the correction event. The correction event starts the moment the dog does the behavior that we don't want, and it ends the moment the dog receives the correction. And we don't yell at our dogs, and this isn't about being alpha or dominance. One of the best analogies that I can associate to this sort of training and the concept, the way that I like to look at it, is the same as jiu-jitsu. You can never be a good jiu-jitsu practitioner if you never do live rolls, if you never spar with people. And if you spar with people, you're gonna be placed in an arm bar. I can't tell you how many times I've been arm barred. You're gonna get choked. You're gonna have your leg put in a leg lock. There's things that's going to happen, but every time that happens, you become a better practitioner. If my sparring partner gets me in an arm bar, okay, now I know how to defend it better. Which means next time he puts me in arm bar, he had to navigate through that defense, so his arm bar tactic has improved. And because that has improved, my defense is going to improve, et cetera, and that's how we get better and better. I'm not mad at him for putting me in an arm bar because he's not mad at me. We're training together. Now, if I look at it on the other side, and let's say, so I train with one of the greatest grapplers in the world, Lucas Barbosa. Super nice guy. He can whoop anybody. When I spar with him, he's able to beat me, obviously, but it's super nice. It's a friendly roll. He gets me an arm bar, submission, we slap hands, and we go back to rolling, and it's a really good time. But if I walked into his dojo and he came at me aggressively, and he was mad, and he wanted to prove he was the alpha, and he slammed me down and put me in the arm bar, totally different experience. Now I don't want to be around him. I'm going to avoid him. I'm going to be nervous in his presence. Completely different feeling and experience, same actions. And this is how it is with our dogs. We're not dominating them. We're not alpha rolling them. We're not holding, we're not yelling at them. It's a consequence to the game that we're playing. And when they get the correction, they shouldn't see it as, oh no, this horrible thing. They go, okay, in order to get better, I'm going to avoid doing that. And then we reward them for the correct thing. So correction event ends when the dog receives the correction. Now, what's also important to this, and what's interesting is, the greater your percentages is of correcting the dog, the more reliable your obedience is going to be, and the less you're going to have to correct your dog. So if every time you say no, you follow through with the correction, you will correct your dog less, and you will have a higher trained or a more reliable dog when it comes to obedience. So if when I'm working with her, she breaks the position, wrong, and I said wrong again, I wasn't ready. If she breaks the position and I say no, and she goes back, she still gets the correction, but once she's back in the position, I'm going to praise her. If she breaks the position, I say no and I correct her, and she's not back on the platform because maybe she freezed in place, then I'm gonna have to initiate a new reinforcement event. So once she gets the correction, remember, each event can end based on what's going on. If she breaks the position, I say no, it's a correction event. Once she gets the correction, that concludes the correction event. Now I have to give her a new reinforcement event to get her back into the stay. If she were to try to take off, same thing, I follow through with the correction. This is the same if you're using a leash. So if I'm walking around and she breaks the position, I say no, and I walk over to her, I have to get to her, give her the correction with the leash pop, climb, take her back to the platform. So think about it, it's no, followed by the correction. If the dog's already back on the platform because they did instant compliancy, we praise them. If they're not, we recommand the position that they just broke, and if needed, we assist them. And what I mean by that is, if my dog breaks and I say no and I correct her, and I say climb, and she's like, I don't know what you mean, I'm gonna help her do it. I'm not gonna tell her climb, she doesn't do it, no, correction. Because we have to assume when we start adding corrections, our dog's going to become mildly stressed. Some dogs are going to be very stressed if they're more sensitive. So we have to be sensitive to them being sensitive, and we have to make sure they're successful and they win. All right, so now I'm going to demonstrate with the remote collar. And another thing that happens, because this is a muscle stimulator, I've talked to people before and maybe they read an article that was titled The Shocking Truth to Shock Collars. Oh no, if the dog wears the shock collar, they're going to look sad and they're going to look worried and they're going to be fearful. That's just the poor use of corrections. If a dog doesn't know when they're going to get corrected, what's going to cause the correction, they don't know how to prevent the correction, they don't know how to stop the correction when it happens, of course your dog's going to be fearful and worried and stressed. But if they know how to prevent it, they know what causes it, they know how to stop it, then you're not going to have any of that associated stress that you might read about. And this is the only way to have true off-leash reliability. If you walk around your dog off-leash without a remote collar, in my opinion, it's a little irresponsible. I'm guilty, I've done it before, but it is a little irresponsible because if I had her without a remote collar and we were out in public somewhere and she saw something, because I can't simulate all the thousands of different possible situations that might occur, and she takes off and then I'm just going, oh, and yelling at her, I don't have the reliability, because that thing that's causing her to go away from me is a higher level of motivation for her to do that behavior. So if we want off leash, be responsible, have a remote collar. All right, so I have it in my hand. I have the button, so I'm ready, and now I'm going to see if I can get her to break the position. Good girl. No. So there she went back. So she got the correction. Good girl. Very good. So on that one, she broke the position. I said no. She got the correction, and she did which one? Instant compliancy. So that's an example, or that is how it looks when they do instant compliancy. They go back after the correction. If she didn't go back, remember, I would have recommanded climb. I would have helped her if needed. Good girl. The rules that I follow when it comes to teachable moments or correction events. Remember, teachable moment is a reinforcement event. That's when they break and we say wrong and we help them go back. I don't give them a treat. So she breaks the position, I say wrong, and she goes back, no treat. If she breaks the position, no correction, she goes back, no treat. Once she's holding the position, now I can go, good girl, nice job. And I can follow it up with a few rewards. But I don't want to reward them right away after they break. Now we're going to do the same process with the sit stay, the down stay, the exact same process that we did before. We're just replacing the reinforcement event when we say wrong, the teachable moment, with the correction event. And remember, your dog is probably going to do one of those 4 responses once they're classically conditioned to the word no. Eventually, you're going to get to a point where you can't even get your dog to break the position. And just like our loose leash walking game, it's the same thing. We're playing a game. Can I get any points? Can I make her break? Can I toss treats? Can I roll a ball? Can I bring other dogs out and get her to break? Oh, she's winning the game. Now if I want, I can tell her, get it, and she can go and get the treats. And now she's won the game. So she can take a moment, sniff around, get the rewards. So that's how we're going to start correcting the stay. So now we've covered how to correct dangerous and destructive behaviors, how to correct the stay or the dog violating boundaries. Exact same process. Now, how do we correct commands? The way that I correct commands, this is the criteria that I want. I want the dog to be 80% proficient on the command, meaning they're responding to the verbal command if that's what I'm going to correct, or they're 80% proficient on the physical cue, so I can correct non-compliancy to that as well. Once they're at 80% proficiency in that environment, then I can correct for non-compliancy. The way that I do that, if I tell, so let's see, if I tell her down, okay, she did it, sit, heel, center, down, heel, free. Okay, she did it all. But if she didn't do it, if she went, I'm not going to do it. The moment I see that, so I say down, so imagine you're training me and I'm the dog, you say down, and the moment you notice I'm going, F you, I'm not doing it, that's the moment you say no. If you're using a leash pop, you're going to pop the leash. If you're using a remote collar, you're going to stim the collar. Remember, when you say no, you're going to have one of those responses: instant compliancy, evasion, freeze in place, come to the human. Doesn't matter what they do, they get the correction. If they go back into the position or they do the position, meaning you tell them down and then you say no and they lay down, that would be an example of instant compliancy. Break. And that's also another good thing you should practice. Randomly giving your dog commands. Down, break. Just at any random point, sit, break. And I'm just saying break. I get it. I'll let her get a treat. But that makes them more aware because you're throwing in those random commands. But if I give a command and I say no and they comply, they still get the correction. And then after the correction, good dog. Now, if they don't do it, we repeat the command and we assist them. So again, I wouldn't tell a dog down, they don't do it, no correction, down, no correction, down, no, we're not gonna do that. Down, the dog doesn't do it, no correction, down, the dog still doesn't do it, we help them. We use a lure, we use a leash cue, we make sure they're successful. We don't wanna correct them multiple times for the same thing. So now if we're using the leash, we're gonna swing back this way. So let's say the dog's at a distance from me. This is why we get the dog conditioned to the no. Now the easiest way to get a dog conditioned to no is by taking them on a walk. Ari, we're not exploring over there. We take them on a walk, and that's the easiest for most dogs to start teaching them that no means a correction. No, pop the leash, no, pop the leash. So now if my dog's at a distance and my dog breaks the position, I'm gonna say no, and then I'm gonna run as fast as I can. No, we're not gonna go running at the dog. When I first started learning dog training, I was taught to go, no, 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 no. Well, if the dog's conditioned to no being a marker, now every time we say no, we're releasing cortisol, we're causing stress. We say no, no, this is wrong, this is wrong. So it's a marker, it pinpoints a moment in time when the dog is right or wrong. So a dog makes a mistake, I go, no. I calmly walk towards the dog. Then I tell the dog what I want, down. Let's say I help them, good dog. Follow it up with the reward. So it's a very predictable sequence. We don't have to run. If I say no, the moment I start walking towards the dog, that is the correction event. When they receive the correction, whether it's a leash pop or a stim on the collar, that concludes the event. The correction is over. Now, last thing with the remote collar. This course is not about corrections, but I wanted you to have understanding of the process that I go through when I'm using corrections. If I'm using a remote collar on a dog, and I've gotten to the point where I'm adding corrections for the dog breaking the stay, there is a chance that the dog breaks the stay and we stim the collar and the dog looks confused, where they're like, what the heck was that? Most of the time that doesn't happen if the dog's already conditioned to the word no, because they hear no, they're expecting a correction, great. But if they look confused, then what I do is I take the leash, I attach the leash to the dog. I'm gonna turn this off because I'm gonna simulate like I'm using it and I don't wanna correct my dog. So now it's off. This is the way I hold it if I'm pairing it with the leash. I take the leash, I put my middle finger through it, and I loop it around. That's gonna keep the leash in place while I hold the remote. I'll take the dog on a walk, and when they break the position, I'm gonna say no, and at the exact moment I pop the leash, boop, I stim the collar. So pop and stim, pop and stim, pop and stim. That's going to help the dog become directional. Same thing if I'm doing just a normal stay, not loose leash walking. The dog breaks the position, the exact moment I pop the leash, boop, that's when I stim. So you video gamers, this is gonna be super easy. You're pairing the leash pop with the stim. That's going to provide direction for the dog. What's going to give them a clear understanding that the correction's coming from you and it's not some sort of magical mystery force that's doing that to them. Also, what's important to know, and you should try this on yourself, if you put the leash, you take it off and you put it on yourself, and then you take the remote collar, and by the way, if you're gonna use a remote collar on yourself, you must shock yourself at the highest level that the remote collar can provide on continuous. You don't have to, but I do it because I wanna know what the dog's going to feel, and I wanna feel it at the highest level, so when I correct them at a 10 or a 15, it's really nothing. It's very light. So if you've been thinking about a remote collar, like I said, I'm an advocate of them. I think they're great. It gives you off-leash freedom. It's better for the dog to have that freedom as long as we teach it correctly. So when we go to do the pop, especially if you're using a prong collar, pop and shock on yourself. If you do the leash pop too hard, then what's gonna happen is the sensation from the popping of the leash is gonna override the sensation of the remote collar. When I'm using the leash to correct the dog, the leash and the collar is providing the correction. If I'm using the leash to provide only direction and the correction is coming from the remote collar, then the leash pop must be very, very light. It's a very light pop. It shouldn't be hard enough to override the stim from the remote collar, or else you're not going to be teaching your dog how to be directional. So then I'm going to pair it with the leash for a little while, and I'm going to attempt to do it again without the leash. If I correct my dog and they no longer look confused, great, my dog's directional. If I correct my dog without the leash and the dog still does one of these, which they do sometimes, then I know the dog's not directional. I got to put the collar and the leash back on, and I have to do more reps with that. So with using corrections, we covered dangerous, destructive behaviors we don't want the dog to perform, the stay, as well as how to correct non-compliancy for commands. If you follow this structure, I promise you're going to have a really well-trained dog, as long as you never make any of the corrections personal ever. Meaning you never yell at your dog, you never get angry. It needs to be part of the game, just like my sparring analogy with jiu-jitsu. And if you do that, you're gonna have that off-leash trained dog that you've always wanted.